This rooftop would have been a people watcher's dream. Of course, that's an outdated designation. It goes without saying. People watch people. I'm not up here for the unfiltered view of society in motion. It's not the time for that, and my filtered influx of data is far more useful than a random sample. Poignancy can be so misleading. I go to the roof to see the open sky. Real-life depth perception has a slight edge. Lots of people can't stare at the sky for long. I lay on my back and look at nothing else for a solid half-minute before it feels unproductive. I am still wearing lens, but only in glass mode. It's UV protective, so why not? And maybe I just feel ostentatious taking it off, like I'm the humble tech pioneer who's super attuned to reality. Not that there's anyone up here to recognize me, and I should be far beyond caring, but the phantom weight of what we once called judgment is strongest when I'm alone. My personal judge is the harshest critic. The hum of drones is quieter than I usually find at this height. If I had more time, I might browse flight patterns overhead. They have the chute here. It's more felt than heard. A faint rumble that I might not even notice if I turned on my feed, in which case I would see the nearest delivery network. I take a puff of whatever the system prescribed, an indulgence for special occasions. It wasn't even allowed to practice a few years ago, but now it knows better than any doctor. My, how they grow. The special occasions have been frequent lately, but today is unique, and the dispensation is mild. 2 floors below, Dave Gunther is preparing an array of recording devices to immortalize a concentrated delivery of words in that antiquated fashion which has become his brand. There's an unsettling surety that we'll both succumb to a change in disposition the moment I announce my arrival. A relic of the not-so-distant past, which won't be so disconcerting to him. Why are we physically meeting? Dave is what the terminologically inclined would call sensorist. He believes in a level of communication which can only be shared through physical proximity. He doesn't merely believe such a thing exists, we all know that, but he's willing, more than willing, to forfeit all the conveniences of our age and the inherent frontiers of growth, simply to retain his grasp on the type of stimulus he associates with real life. It sounds admirable, but it's a simplistic definition of real life which compels him. A definition he thinks fundamental to nature, but it's really quite circumstantial. Age has a lot to do with it. He imagines himself a timeless being. I'd say he's firmly planted in the 2010s, with fragments of an even earlier time. He's refused to evolve beyond that. He likes to think that the public still tunes into his show on their stationary home devices, and he formats it as such, prolonging the illusion that perhaps this is all ironic, which it is, just not deliberately. Dave came onto the scene when the conventional notion of production value was declining. He, being conventional to the core, was unaware of this trajectory and saw only one way to produce a show. He was bad at what he attempted, but the public distaste for overproduction perfectly intercepted his failure to convey it. While this doesn't quite explain his popularity, it's an exemplary component of the gigantic fluke that is his personal brand. Years later, that is now, he would be perceived as my most public opponent, though I've really only been perceived in public imagination to this point. He's an opponent of the products with which I've been affiliated. Surely for Dave it was lens, perhaps the entire domain of augmented and virtual display, which he deemed humanity's unnatural misstep. Although he might insist it was no particular thing, simply that he was already content and felt no need to change, the merit of which hangs on the presupposition that contentment is a virtue with distinct confines. Above all, I think Dave is stubborn. We need the stubborn. I respect Dave. In fact, I have about the most and the least conceivable degrees of respect for him. The most because he's survived as a public figure when that title was all but wiped out, and the least because, well, the same reason. He's a man of words, which I am not. Words lead to quick conclusions, which are deceiving, but calculated deceit sometimes helps guarded people connect. I'm not to say what's purely right and wrong. Today he'll try to understand me the only way he knows how. I'll lend him my voice, or perhaps vice versa. I'll speak his language, which is an American English from somewhere between the information and irony age, that demands unwavering beats, emphatic redundancy, and incessant visual cues. Dave finds it effective, but he doesn't know what he doesn't know. Like that the celebrity culture to which he pays tribute might have impeded critical voices in desperate times. Or maybe he knows this. In fact, he must know. But he has his own game to play, and an audience that needs him, or believes they do, because they don't believe in the Prism, or lens for that matter. Resistance to change is usually sweeping. They think he's the last stronghold of authenticity, but he's a performer, whether he knows it or not. Dave's afraid that I'll be constantly psychoanalyzing him. Incidentally, he's right, but psychoanalysis has very different meanings to a word man and a Prism man. He's afraid of all the wrong things. I'm cautious, but rarely afraid. Luckily, I can talk fast, so I'll survive this encounter. I'm not very skilled at emoting with my face, so I'll avoid that game from the start. And I'm not a habitual speaker, but I use such language in my head because I grew up with it. My inner dialogue, it is in fact a dialogue, employs whatever contextual stage might have once held weight for the topic at hand. An award acceptance speech, a roast, a eulogy, a late-night talk show interview, pillow talk, and on to the next one at the speed of thought. Today requires consistency, but I'll find a versatile character. It starts to rain. I'm going down now. We didn't set a time. At least I didn't. Almost all structures have been redone or repurposed in the last decade, but there's often a remnant of the old world somewhere. The archaic stairwell to this roof has been miraculously untouched, even amid the construction of a chute system and an elevator shaft, though, as I said, one such miracle is statistically likely in any structure. The steps creak as I walk down to my host's door. It's odd to be hosted, whatever that means. There's a button on the door, distinguishing his from the rest. The tone is about to be set for an exchange that will likely last hours, a daunting consideration, but one I've adequately processed. Hello, welcome! Pleasantries are the bane of civilization, aren't they? Oh, I just said that. Didn't think cynicism would be the first thing through the gates. Meta-conversational observations can serve as a crutch when filling sound space. Not that a crutch is a bad thing, but Dave will infer that I'm annoyed, which is incorrect.
Well, I, for one, am thrilled that you're here.
Did you doubt that I'd show up?
No, but I had a fleeting vision of how bad it would be if you didn't.
Based only on your expectations. You don't really know what's ahead. He makes a facial expression evoking a retired meme that implied something like, "Oh, that's deep." Properly used only in the sense that, yes, he thought that was deep. I suppose it's relative. He gestures to sit down, not wishing a word of this to evade capture. I know the show well enough. It cuts in abruptly whenever he decides. I compliantly sink into one of the two aged leather seats, the one that has me in frame left. I was wrong about there being only one remnant of old times in this building. A large black camera, exclusively a camera, sits on a tripod pointed between us, presumably with a wide angle, and smaller versions at eye level across from each of us. Staggered in between are microphones, exclusively microphones, reaching above the cameras and looming over us. I fix my gaze on an X taped to the floor straight across. That's where I'll look, even though it's not meant for me. Eye-to-eye contact distracts me from my thoughts. There are no camera operators, which I wouldn't expect but to keep with the theme. Everything seems to have buttons. Buttons were once a sign of computing power. The window behind us is open, surprising only because these microphones are likely to pick up the rain. He must want it that way. Sensory integration, I suppose. Anyway, back to him.
Well, it means a lot that you're even here, so...
Maybe, maybe not. The humor is probably too dry for his detection, but all types of people are or will be tuned in. I'm kind of a big deal, even as just a concept. I can't please everyone at once, but I can please everyone separately.
I guess, I'm flattered, honestly, but kind of surprised that you wanted to be here.
Why flattered? Interaction doesn't imply admiration, is what I'd like to say, but he's not ready for that, and I'm not rushing my responses. I'll give him what he wants. Well, Prism people have to step outside the box sometimes.
Oh yeah? For their sake or for the rest of the world?
Both.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my guests use the Prism and go off it for the show.
He means they go off lens. Lens being a device, Prism being technically an application. I won't correct him.
But there's almost an implied concession in being here that they know the drawbacks of Prism-connected life, and they do the show as this brief act of penance before they return to their addiction, right?
He wants me to interject at addiction, But when I don't, he rambles on about how surprising it is that I'm here because, in his words, I launched the Prism movement, and this seems like the ultimate contradiction. Accurate enough that I won't dispute any part of it. Finally, he sort of half asks a question. I'll work with it.
So that's been the debate, right? Whether you'd ever subject yourself to such a vulnerable medium, since you're sort of this private kind of person who engineered sort of an ultra calculated world.
The truth is, though, every medium is vulnerable. We live in media of different kinds. It's impossible to calculate how everything we do or say will be received, but we can use machine data to create something of a filter.
But I mean, you certainly aren't known for your words, so there's not much to filter for you.
No, only known by name, only those words.
Why is that?
That I don't speak to the public?
Yeah.
I don't want to spread my words too thin to where they're received without the proper context. And I'm not afraid of exposure.
Well, what are you afraid of?
The same thing we all are, misrepresentation. Most of us, I think most of us, would express anything in the right context, the complete context, which of course is purely theoretical, in this dimension at least. But we've already seen with the Prism that we can be better understood, and that it doesn't require eloquence or gamesmanship. I haven't talked like that in years, but it sounds all right. I'm neither speaking to him exactly, nor stating my thoughts exactly. Just meaningless enough.
Am I eloquent or a gamesman? Is that what you think?
In a way.
Do you think this medium serves your need for clean, calculated self-representation? Because it can be gritty and unpredictable. You know that, right?
I don't need clean and calculated. I can do gritty. Or I could do a meticulous, premeditated, tell-all sort of manifesto, but it wouldn't really tell all because I'd be retaining predictability for myself. So here I am.
So I'm still not sure what it is for you, though. What's kept you out of the spotlight? Do you want recognition? Do you want the platform that comes with success? Or are you one of those people who just doesn't want it, who thinks there doesn't have to be a correlation between what you're able to do and what you deserve from it?
That's 3 to 5 questions in very different categories. The platform to answer for what I've created, yes, I think I should be the first in line to explain it, at least my role in it. But success, as I think you mean that, measured by consumer response, doesn't necessarily merit a platform. That can leak over into credentials being attributed where they shouldn't.
But the success of what you created is virtually indisputable.
I agree with your meaning, but the public response isn't my achievement. My achievement is only that I found an outlet for my best ideas, which is what I would wish for everyone, but it didn't always exist. So, as it turns out, the Prism sort of takes care of the need for recognition. What you call my success was itself the turning point.
But I mean, for anyone to achieve such success with the masses, you must tap into something universally true. I mean, I'm trying to give you some credit here. It's brilliant in some sense, in the sense that it takes a degree of, the right stuff to engineer a successful social movement.
Now we're talking, but he's still using dodgy terms, and I don't need whatever credit means to him. There's universal truth in everything, though, if anything. It's not hit or miss. It's a matter of how well it's revealed to a given perceiver or through a particular object. Is there an exact correlation between that and notoriety? Of course not. There's a pattern, but not an exact correlation. There are countless vulnerabilities one can tap into, intentionally or not, to win people over. Not to say I aimed for that, but only that my work is subject to the same sociological tides as everything else. Fame isn't a real measure of success, certainly not of what's good.
The proof is in the pudding, right?
If the pudding is what?
Well, the outcome, right? Like it means...
I know what the expression means, but okay, well, every taster has to decide what they're looking for in the pudding, to use that metaphor. I'm suggesting maybe there is no proof of what's good, only pudding. And yes, you have to try it to decide if it's good or not to you.
So where is the validation for you?
Probably my ventral tegmental region. He's still processing that. I'll go on. I mean, from a reasoning standpoint, I may never feel sure that what I've done is entirely good, because it's constantly remanifesting like everything. But of course, there's a Pavlovian sort of social validation that I experience, even if it's just the mind creating its own reward. That kicks in when I feel that I've made something truthful, that something truthful endured from inspiration to implementation, even without knowing exactly where the inspiration comes from.
It's intrinsically rewarding to you, you're saying.
It's a deferred and dispersed, yeah, okay, which you would call intrinsic. Not just from work having been performed, though, but the tangible result. I mean, it is about the product, if you consider it a product. The reward really is the ability to understand and be understood by our deepest inclinations. That's the new currency. That's what frees us from resting on labels.
Well, okay, I'm not on the Prism,
But I'm speaking of its cultural impact and what it does for individual identity, extends to collective identity. Its services are imparted across the board.
but it changes how I'm perceived.
Insofar as it changes how we collectively perceive, like every development before, yes.
But maybe I don't like that, or maybe I just don't care.
Why might you not like that?
Well, because it's tampered with my identity.
Well, that suggests you do care, so which is it?
Well, I mean, there's a range of feelings that we non-Prism people might be experiencing.
It sounds like it's added an identifiable factor to the plethora of external factors that form your identity, which brings you more consciously in touch with your pluralistic nature.
But who are you to have a say in my identity?
A member of your pluralistic nature. Cheeky but sincere. A teaser to the more explicit line of questioning yet to come. He doesn't want to take it further just yet. Time to loop back for the basics we overstepped.
I'm speaking with Matt Anderson. I'm your host, Dave Gunther. Real quick, I know some of you are tuning in for the first time today because this is the episode with the guy from Inter, the Inter. Maybe you're not a user, you're not integrated, as they say, but on some level, you know the Prism, okay? He is, dare I say, reportedly the man who made the Prism. Made it in 6 days. Actually, I don't know how long it took. We'll find out. Haven't gotten there yet. Every stone will be turned, unturned, perhaps twice turned. So a firm welcome to our newcomers. Not firm. Warm. How's that? A warm welcome to you. Hey, you're going to want to make this one count. How about a delicious, hot, protein-packed pie from Rebel Meats to keep you sharp while you listen?
He's doing an advertisement and convincing himself that because this company pays him money, he genuinely likes their product. He wants to justify it so badly. Indeed, he justifies it badly. Does he know he can record this later and that there are vastly more effective means of endorsement available if that's really what he wants? Of course he does. It's just not his style.
Consistency is important to Rebel in every sense, and Rebel is dear to me because they know the art of specialty. They've been doing one thing really well for years, and that's pies, meat pies. Why handcrafted food? Why merge art and sustenance when we already know how to generate so-called perfect flavors? I'll tell you why. Because you know the difference on a level you didn't know you knew. I'll repeat that. You know the difference. Listen to your heart. The heart in your mouth. Do me a favor. No, do yourself a favor and try one. They'll deliver hot or cold by shoot or flyer, whatever serves you, in minutes. Or just go out and get one. You've got legs. Order one of their delicious varieties now and have it while listening to this show. What flavors can I get, you ask? Well, you'll be pleased to know Rebel calls their flavors exactly what they taste like. Chicken and steak.
Oh my God, no, he didn't.
Yeah, that's what they're called. Hearkening to a simpler time in mind and morality. Nostalgic for some, unsettling for others. Don't get your panties all in a bunch. Their ingredients are up to code. And absolutely fantastic. Listen, if it's not your thing, don't eat it. You won't hurt my feelings. Let economic selection have its way. What do you think, Matt? Give the meat pies a chance?
I have no stake in this. He looks stunned.
The mystery man behind the biggest social revolution of our time, cracking savory puns on my show. He must be human.
Only slightly presumptuous.
Matt, I don't want to waste a second of our precious time here.
Too late for that.
So let's talk about your work from sort of the ground up, okay?
Chronologically or in terms of complexity?
Well, let's start with the basics of what the Prism is for the new and perhaps cautionary member of our audience, and then we'll get into the role of technology and I assume culture on the whole paving the way for this contribution to the cyber social zeitgeist within your personal timeline.
He's so nervous about actually asking a question.
So we all know the prism as an icon, that familiar but always unique barcode of color, if you will. But what is it really? In essence, do you have a ready-made definition of the prism?
This is going to be like explaining humanity itself from scratch, but I've done this in my head. Yeah, I'd say it's a visual representation of a person's motivations and tendencies generated using the consistent feed of data from lens. Lens is the eyes and ears of the prism.
And brain?
No, the prism is the brain.
Or maybe the heart.
The heart would just be the software. I think that metaphor is falling apart.
Okay, so lens is the hardware, and when you have lens, the device you wear on your face, the eyes of the prism, you said, what do you see?
That depends how you're using it. Lens is an interchangeable device. It can be used as a screen for virtual activity or a literal lens to augment RL, as you call it, real life, with helpful information.
Information like other people's prisms.
For one, yeah, but in a very selective and mutually beneficial way. It doesn't rely on chance encounters or manual lookup. It's not a hookup app.
Well, okay, so what are the benefits of seeing each other's prisms? Explain that.
Well, not just seeing each other's prisms, but getting connected whether you see the prism or not. The system brings the right minds together, and it gives them a purpose in doing so. The prism system knows what you're looking for, so to speak.
That's prism system, not prison system.
Anyone listening for context knows that. Correct.
But most users actually learn to read prism, right? So when they see a prism on somebody, they can use that information, whether it was suggested to them or not.
Yeah, they develop the ability intuitively to look at the image, the bar of color, and infer what's meaningful to them. That's the key. It's a visual language, and not really something that translates into spoken language. It's not practiced, it's just learned, like facial recognition. So an experienced user can fairly well sense how any other prism could potentially interact with them, how their needs and abilities align. It's a system of distributing needs and abilities efficiently.
Okay, so let's say I put on a pair of lens. Is that the right way to say it?
You put on lens, yeah.
Okay, I put on lens. What's the first thing that happens? People start seeing everything it knows about me, basically?
The prism isn't going to show up until it has time to generate that essential information. It takes a while to determine what is consistent and meaningful from your patterns of behavior. It doesn't just spew facts for the casual viewer to interpret like we often do with spoken language.
Okay, so initially, to start using lens, do I have to get a brain scan or something?
He knows the answer to that question. No, you have to wear lens for a few weeks.
Okay, let's say I'm a few weeks in, or let's use you. You put on lens first thing in the morning. What happens?
I'm going to start in AR mode, unless I'm in a hurry to navigate somewhere, and I'm not usually in a hurry. So it's going to project information on my field of vision that will match my curiosities, my abilities, my physical and physiological needs, and maximize my productivity within those boundaries. And so I can close windows and override suggestions at will, and it will take that into account.
So at some point you have to tell it what you're interested in.
Not in an articulate sense, no, as I'm not really the best judge of that, but in kind of an ongoing sense. It identifies the reality of what I'm after by constantly scanning my line of sight and measuring how I react to every detail. So it's not dependent on my ability to articulate that.
But it can recognize everything you look at and everything you say in a way that carries the same meaning it has to you?
Once enough information is built up, yeah, because it's not just using visual intuition, it's retrieving cataloged information on all tagged objects.
Okay, and tagged objects are, explain.
Just about everything. When things are produced in factories, or printed, or built, or scanned, or even looked at and talked about, regardless of their source, information is entered into the system, and that way it can insert the object into the VR maps, as it does people, so that there's a current, near exact duplication of every trafficked place. And it learns the object's meaning. It knows a public door from a private one, and the nuance in between, basic things like this, so that a virtual user can have a real-life experience with it.
And this is how people get stuck living inside the lens.
Meaning,
Well, it's addictive.
Okay, I assume you're talking about VR mode now, which allows one to stay inside as long as they choose.
Wasting their life away.
Well, actions and interactions in VR mode have practically the same implications as they would in body, because the users in AR can see as much of the VR user as they've chosen to upload. A full body hologram if they want, although more commonly just a floating prism and an avatar.
But what, I mean, people just see parts of each other through glasses and never have any real communication.
The device has all the capabilities of any computing device you have.
Where are the controls?
In your fingertips. Have you never used it? Or seen someone use it?
I don't want to because I think these kids don't know what they're missing and I don't like it.
What are we missing?
Well, you're old enough to know this, but apparently it doesn't matter to you. For starters, they never even had the chance to interact with someone like me who's not on lens. I wouldn't see them on the street. They wouldn't see me.
They would probably know you were there, because passerby's data would signal your approximate location.
I can be on a nearly empty street and there's actually hundreds of people there with me. That's not comforting.
More or less, yeah.
Watching my every move.
No, only eyes that are on you can really see you. Or transmit you.
Transmit. Okay, what does that mean?
Well, some people use carriers, meaning they're watching through the lens of someone public, or someone is working for them as a physical presence. So I should say you're only seen through the lenses that are looking at you, that have a physical presence. And nobody really cares what you do.
Oh, that's great. Thanks a lot.
Well, but it is, because we're not judgy like that. See, we're not affected by exposure like people used to be, because we're past that dangerous zone where information exceeds understanding. The prism is all about understanding, so we don't draw conclusions from the surface appearance of anything. We merge our abilities to better understand the background, the context, the underlying reality.
So like you're saying, okay, first off, does the prism deal more with how the person is by nature, or do you mean to say that it's looking at how their environment shaped who they've become?
It's impossible to say that there's a point where nature stops, but it keeps the less predictable factors of environment from distorting one's actions or the interpretation thereof. A malleable environment is necessary for practically understanding the process of nature. So you might say it's manifesting more immediately than ever as we recover from an overwhelmingly synthetic environment. The environment we've created has become kind of ultra-natural.
No way you're saying that. There's no way you're saying that.
Yes, because we're presenting ourselves as we really are and not creating artificial barriers all over the place. We want more than anything for our prisms to accurately represent us, and that's what's rewarded instead of fortuitous power handoffs.
Reward in what sense?
A very real person is going to be met with tasks and interactions well suited to their proclivities, which satiates a fundamental human need.
How can anyone be real if their life is a video game? And how do you get to decide what's real?
It is slightly ironic, the role that simulation plays in all of this, but I think you can understand how it's real. Remember that a lot of us grew up using products like Lens recreationally and became proficient gaming with it, but had no trouble transitioning to high-stakes interaction once the logistics kicked in to make that possible and the events made it necessary. We made the best of a difficult situation. As for my credibility, you have to either take the thing as a working system or not.
Okay, so maybe this is where we start talking about how the factors intersected, if you will, to bring all this about, because you alluded to a difficult situation. I want to get to how you became involved with Inter and how they became involved with the Prism, but where does it all begin in your mind?
Well, I have to start with the world climate I was born into, because I can't vouch for the existence of anything before that.
Well, I can.
Again, can't vouch for that, but I'll accept the terms. Life is all about accepting the terms. So let's start with the big picture, not cosmically, but culturally. We were born into a world where information was more powerful than what had once been called work ethic. It seems that up to then, the prevailing unit of power had been human numbers. But to us, my age and below, the prospect of being thrown at dying industries as simply multi-purpose machines wasted as middlemen between radically different generations was sort of a threat because we were so wired and ready for change, but that was still what most of us got stuck with, at least temporarily.
I disagree about the dying industries. I think we killed the hands-on workforce with our attitude.
Well, for one, we haven't killed the hands-on workforce, and I think what you refer to as our attitude was our natural drive to become more efficient, which feels like a sustained discomfort with the existing ways of doing things. It's the nature of change.
It's the nature of hard work. Why did your generation have the lowest number of skilled workers in recent history?
We had latent skills without the resources to utilize them effectively. Even though we had all the world's information at our fingertips, there wasn't enough conventional wealth available for a growing population to even chase the same goals as our predecessors. So we needed to recalibrate our goals in order to mobilize, but we couldn't with the psychographic division between generations. It was just too extreme to do a complete overhaul until eventually, nature ran its course. We could have planted seeds and sown plans in the meantime, but we were raised to use our tech resources as a means of escape, and thus the majority of a generation, depending how you measure that, was led to a game they really couldn't play and was wasted as an example of what doesn't work. I was somewhere in the middle of that pack, but I survived by not buying it.
So who is it exactly?
Do you want me to specify individuals?
Well, no. What's the pack? Who failed with this information and technological wealth, in your opinion?
It's basically everyone that grew up with phones, as we briefly defined phones, before the switch to eyewear. We weren't in a position to really utilize the world in our pockets in a world that still ran on a very different platform. So we were stuck in a useless middle ground, mentally recalibrated by the volume of stimulus, but in a society unprepared to operate at the pace of rewired brains. Without meaningful outlets, we couldn't collectively develop the self-understanding to further ourselves. We needed a system that could employ changing abilities, but nobody was really thinking to invest in our sense of purpose from a business angle. It was convenient enough to keep our purpose limited. There was a tremendous fear in our culture of cutting hours and jobs because we didn't know any way to manage resources besides occupational placeholders. No interest in redistributing labor for fear of exposing the arbitrary distribution of wealth, and no desire to reward skill development outside the corporate sphere.
Sounds like you're admitting we became weak and unhireable.
The measures of strength and weakness change, not just the measures, but the abilities measured. Every generation has different strengths and gives up some of the skills that have become unnecessary, and the transition can be tough.
But how can skills become unnecessary?
The domain of skills didn't become unnecessary. The objects of our skills became obsolete when they were inevitably replaced with different objects. So we had to stop treating muscle memory and system compliance as the extent of our ability. Those are actually the most replaceable things.
How? How do you explain? How do you replace good old-fashioned know-how? You can't. That's humanity.
You can, and no, it's not. I don't want to treat you like an idiot, but let me try to break down your misconceptions here. I think you've been conditioned to look for the overlap between natural acuity and topical interest. The two overlap sometimes, but not enough for an efficient workforce to be built on this model.
It was efficient for the last 400 years, and I figured that out myself. It was no conditioning required.
It was effective at certain things. It wasn't efficient, and thus it was ineffective at providing everyone a sense of purpose and basic dignity, which seems to be the prevailing objective now.
Oh, come on.
In a world where people have to fit into locally available gaps and remain there long enough to gain experience, you're statistically certain to fail at maximizing ability distribution and condemn most of the workforce to long hours of doing things they don't want to do. The time has come to move beyond that.
But that's what work is. It's doing things you don't want to do.
That's where we'll fundamentally disagree. And enough saw it my way that we hit a breaking point where the culture simply had to change. It spoke for itself.
To make it what? What, shorter and more fun?
More varied and more gratifying.
Oh, okay, shorter and more fun. How?
It happens a lot of ways. It always depends on which frontiers are developed first. We stopped commuting every day. That was a distinct and fairly abrupt change. We figured out how to make smooth transfers between concrete information people and abstract creative people, to use old labels, so that cooperative efforts weren't truncated into static meetings. That took some time, but in the end, we saw a lot of work broken down into structured tasks which could be taken to one's own space, done in their own way, and eliminating a lot of unnecessary tension and limbo. And the return of social energy was reinvested into hyperspurts of concrete output.
So what happens to figuring things out start to finish, to independence?
There's always been an illusion about independence, a failure among different groups to see just how much they actually depend on other groups and how much larger a given task is than their own part in it. It's actually freeing to realize this. In fact, we found the best ways to incorporate the unchanging sectors, these traditional farmers and machinists, for example, into the industrial redesign through open source proposals and revisions, which allowed us to metaphorically renovate bridges before they were burnt, and thus see the mass of it all as more of a singularity. This model also solved problems of sustainability, such as food supply, which led to obvious changes in our concept of the marketplace.
You're talking about, okay, is Inter doing this, or is this us supposed to be everybody? You're talking about these like distinct pivotal movements in the timeline, but I don't remember it like that, unless this was all behind closed doors.
No, this was a collective movement. It might not have seemed so distinct at the time, but in retrospect, in the big picture, it was a sudden shift. Progress was on an accelerating track, and it snowballed in the 21st century, and Inter was no exception to it, even though they weren't what you know them as now.
They were what at the time?
On the surface, a legacy home, and in practice, a tech company.
Secretly.
Not secret, but not very publicly branded that way.
You weren't part of it yet, though.
I became part of it as a 17-year-old.
Did you get a normal job before then? What did you do to get hired at Inter? Were you one of those guys that finished college like crazy early?
Here's why this guy made a living talking. He stumbles over his thoughts more than any guest possibly could, and interjects too often, rendering himself the most high-strung person in the room, and thus absorbing any sense of performance pressure. You can respond any way you want to these triple whopper questions. It'll always sound like an answer. I'm going to reel it back and start going chronologically. You know, I never went to college. In fact, I never took school very seriously at all, even as a kid.
Really? Why's that?
Well, in my experience, it was so obviously a game to be played, with little correlation to the stated goals. It was system training. And it was a pretty easy game. For me, keep a low profile and pick my battles carefully, except for the boredom of it. That was the hardest part of the training. It was clearly meant to reverse the hyperstimulation that we got everywhere else, but since it didn't work like that, it just became an incentive to grow up and become a real person who calls their own shots. Get out of there. Some people managed to forget their hatred of boredom. I didn't. I resolved to remember.
And when do you feel like you became that, a real person?
Well, that was obviously an illusion I had bought into, because the only thing that ever changed was new information and size and vocabulary and opportunity as a result. And at some point, I deduced that there was reasoning on a subconscious level, and that conscious knowledge was really just a product of experience, which was transformative.
That's when you felt like a real person.
That's when I no longer categorized in terms of youth versus adulthood, because of course I'd been real all along, maybe the most real I'd ever be. We've always had a mixed up idea of what's the real world and what isn't. When you think you've joined real life, you may have actually left it. I had to figure out eventually that I was as real as I'd get. And that's when I started to see the adult world as fraudulent, that they couldn't be as confident as they seemed.
Well, why so sure, though?
Well, you can never be sure. That's the point. You can only choose what to act on. And I could see exactly what I didn't want to become. You know, that was the best sense of self I had. Self is a conditional thing, of course. I just wanted an explanation for why all these people projected ideas and attitudes that didn't resonate with me on any level, until I realized people can say anything, and maybe it doesn't come from such a different place, or maybe it does, but that it's hardly a better reflection of what they actually feel than what I might surmise.
About them, you're saying?
Yeah, like even as a kid, I thought I might be better at knowing what they felt than they did. I thought that pretty early on, like before honesty could really be considered arrogance.
It's audacious, I'll say that much. So did you actually believe anything?
Well, I avoided conclusions because if I labeled every suspicion a belief and thus compelled myself to act on it, I would have acted so absurdly as to close the doors on any chance of real growth. You have to leave the doors open in spite of your suspicions.
Like what suspicions? Like what kind of suspicions?
Like the nature of reality, it's practically impossible to act consistently with any statement of purpose you place on it. You have to let the uncertainty simmer, the necessary uncertainty. Most ideas aren't good enough to rule out all others, and many don't even qualify for action.
Give me an example.
Like wondering whether you might be a brain in a vat, or an uploaded consciousness, or the only consciousness, or everything is predetermined. The conscious mind won't resolve that. There are possibilities we can't control, no matter how terrifying the implications.
I don't know why you choose to believe any of those things, but okay.
I don't choose what to believe.
You never chose to believe in something because it could motivate you, like an afterlife or something?
I visualized objects to correspond with ideas I'd heard, like I imagined an afterlife where we didn't have to speak and all truth was apparent. But since I can't actually simulate experience outside of space and time, I knew my thoughts didn't make it any more real. It's like if you say you imagine a metal man, you either fail to see what makes it metal or makes him man. Call it what you want, but it's just an image.
Were you religious?
No.
But you were taught religious ideas?
Yes.
So church and school, it's the same thing. You're always sitting there, not believing a word of it.
Well, no, as far as school, I'm accepting certain premises. I act on the idea that history went something like it's being taught, even though it's failing to answer the serious questions that I think should precede a study of war or religion or politics. And math is fairly self-evident. Linguistic skills are practical, so I go with it. Science seems true enough, but my thought is, can we first talk about what the hell is the conscious mind? Can we deal with the absolute shock of our own existence before we treat everything as predictable and comprehensible? Well, now we know the answer is yes. Yes, we can. And we finally have a system to present subjects in order of individual need. But we were so caught up in this Renaissance mindset of spreading expertise across all subjects and trying to catch them all before they get away. But it wasn't sustainable. It made organized learning repugnant. We like soluble amounts of knowledge, and we don't need our education compartmentalized and labeled. We knew why we were at school. For childcare, which is necessary if parents have to work all day, when they had to work all day.
Did you believe you would have to work one day?
Yes, I also believed the definition of work would change one day.
What did you envision yourself doing?
Well, I wanted to run a chocolate factory, but when I told anyone that I wanted a chocolate factory, they'd say, you'll have to work very hard and get into business school. So thank God that never happened. I didn't want to manage something. I wanted just to live in it and escape that prospect. My other fantasy was to be a vagrant.
A vagrant? Why?
Well, thank you for asking. I had a board game with a card that said, fell on hard times, and a sweet illustration of this dilapidated boxcar or something, and a guy in flannel with a ukulele living out of it. And nobody encouraged that dream.
It's not too late. It's never too late.
Well, thank you. I take comfort in that.
So what kind of work did you actually do before Enter? Let's get back to that. You had a normal job at one point?
I worked at an arcade/restaurant, family style thing.
As
whatever they asked me to be.
Did you want to be promoted?
No way.
You didn't feel underutilized?
Well, yeah, as almost everyone at that time should have, until we learned to allocate resources properly. But taking on more stress to feel more important wouldn't solve that.
Are you still good at the games? I assume you were.
If I still have it in my muscle memory, I don't know. I'd have to see. It's been a while. I've made games, but I stopped playing them. Or maybe everything is a game.
So then you quit that job
when Inter picked me up.
Right, okay. So tell that story.
So as I said, Inter was on the surface in the post-mortem business, which of course, the business of death is for the living. And what do the living want? A sense of purpose. And I think Inter always saw this correlation, hence the double entendre. But the legacy home concept, though an improvement on the cemetery and a solution to pragmatic issues, still reeked of memorial. Of course, it was more comprehensive than an obituary or an epitaph, and more aesthetically pleasing, but we were still fleeing from our sense of temporality, just as we were running into it via the air scare. So suddenly faced with this prospect of not seeing the outdoors indefinitely, we were thinking in terms of self-replacement for the first time.
Which meant what exactly? Self-replacement.
Well, different meanings to different people. For one, it meant automating and mechanizing tasks that we had once done ourselves directly, and then discovering how this impacted our sense of purpose. To many people, it meant preparing for death, and with all the discussion of machines replacing us, some felt that they deserved a literal physical replacement. Others saw no value in that, but sought to ensure that their values would translate into the cyber realm to which they might be confined. That's when we first considered the prospect of today's gamers as tomorrow's movers and shakers of culture, when we needed a virtual workforce.
But then, of course, the air scare turned out to be...
Yeah, a scare. I think sometimes we forget that there isn't an official body to decide everything, and bizarre things happen because nobody can challenge the body who announces it. Even just this label, the air scare. I mean, what kind of name is that? But it had us expecting something, because we're not all scientists. We have to trust somebody. And this phrase comes out, and we keep hearing it, so it's a thing. And the more you hear it, the greater and more real the thing must be. And it was nothing. It was misreporting. But it can take a massive scare to reset a cultural mindset.
Do you think the attitude we developed toward AI as a result was valuable?
Well, we didn't develop a singular attitude. We had a collective conversation, which, frankly, I'm not sure was organized enough to be valuable at that time. It compounded the state of fear that was already so prevalent, if only because it was something people could blame. Now, you might argue that that was a useful outlet, but we shouldn't fear the domain of AI. We should fear bad programming that pushes a flawed ideology to potentially fatal extremes. But it was so many different things we were talking about. Intelligent machines, obviously valuable. Self-improving machines, potentially valuable, contingent on boundaries. Humanoid-style intelligent machines, unnecessary until there's a reason for them to be indiscernible from humans. Conscious machines, fetishized but implausible, at least without a DNA component. But whatever ideal each different tech corporation was chasing, at least the race got our technologies to a point of extreme helpfulness, and the humanoid stuff crashed and burned as necessary.
Gloriously.
Do you remember the major release of humanoids from that one company? I forgot its name already, but which completely failed Turing and any comparable test in day-to-day life because they focused too much on appearance and not enough on behavior. So everyone found the faces very unsettling. You remember what they did? They issued Halloween-style robot masks, robot helmets, I guess they were, because robots must wear helmets. And it was a mess. You said it, a glorious mess. The tech giants were children playing with toys.
Yeah, so did Inter get stuck in that at all?
They spent the air scare, well, still fronting as just a legacy home, while completing their final version of Lens. And it would have been a great product even without the Prism. They gave that version everything. They didn't hold back for a Turbo Ultra Gel 19 version. They made it perfect, and they waited to release it until the panic passed, so it wouldn't feel like an essential tool for survival, but a choice for optimization. It didn't exploit our sense of detachment. It actually offered a means of reattachment, and it was inherently pleasing, like the old gaming versions. In fact, it had games, which got a lot of people into it initially, but it took the fun to a whole new level.
So why were you hired as a teenager to create this app, which is now the essence of the product?
Oh, I created it on my own. Then they hired me.
How did you create that? This doesn't seem like a job for one person, but like a team of scientists and engineers.
It's actually the sort of thing which, in order to work at all, can really only be done by one person. I know that raises eyebrows, but I didn't push it as laboratory science. You have to decide for yourself, based on the experience, if it's worth accepting without an external proof. Or if you want nothing to do with it, that's fine too. But my experiment was to create a self-improving conversational intelligence and visual interpretation software. The use of it is your experiment.
So where did you start? What was the initial idea? Like, when did that come to you?
I designed a pilot version of the Prism when I was 16 in response to what I felt was a terribly skewed social media world, which disproportionately rewarded charm, forwardness, and reckless extroversion, intentionally or not. I found that the predominant algorithms were largely based on peer approval, which is a self-perpetuating measure, of course, reaffirming those aforementioned traits, which don't necessarily correspond with intelligence or productivity, and something or someone needed to challenge that. His eyes bug out as he categorically considers himself an extrovert and fails to understand the meaning of don't necessarily correspond with intelligence. I'd have said the same of any unjustified psychographic bias, but I won't pause to clarify. I've been pushing his buttons for a while. Why stop now? So where the leading platforms depended on users compiling a friend group or following based on meaningless measures of connection, I set out to create a custom-tailored feed of information, not just user entries, which would efficiently connect the ever-changing needs and abilities of diverse users. It might not be instantly gratifying, but the composite effect of what it presented, which a user wouldn't have even chosen for themselves, amounted to something they eventually chose to continue until they didn't even question the results.
My question is, why connect people who don't know each other when there are already people in our own communities who we don't know?
You're already connected to people you say you don't know, and you don't really know people you say are your friends. And when we accept this vulnerability, instead of trying to insulate ourselves with circumstantial connections and pretend that our common threads yield mutual benefit, we can redefine what relationship means, what network means. We step outside the confines of perceived similarity and simply receive the thing we need from wherever it comes without further obligation. We don't have to fear our own inadequacy because we don't have to market ourselves or guess at what others want us to be when we always have something to offer simply because the path has been made to our beneficiary. We don't have to tout our own qualifications because the system already knows. I know that sounds like an old school business pitch, but I'm aiming for accuracy here, and that's about as concise as I can put it.
So how was this app used in the pilot phase? What was the the method and such?
Most users interacted with it on their phones or a primitive headset of some kind. They would converse with the app rather than with their digital friends and followers directly, and the app, having already evaluated their social data from other sources, would ask user-specific questions and create prompts to further evaluate needs, interests, communication style. It understood what was ironic or insincere or otherwise indirect somehow. And even this early version could infer the user's needs better than any self-assessment and find the best distribution of abilities and resources.
So, but you would say it's their choice?
Of course, but most choices entail deferring other choices, and most of us prefer to outsource certain decisions.
Okay, I'll entertain the idea for a moment. So from this, your app generated a prism for each user,
Correct.
and the users could see it.
Yes, they could see their own prism, and that's part of what I think kept people hooked on it. They felt like they were playing a game, or like the prism was this pet which they were sustaining through constant participation with the app. They didn't exactly know what it meant, but they wanted to, and they knew it was somehow a representation of themselves. They talked about it sort of ironically until it became real to them, as per the life cycle of ironic trends. The jovial tone about wanting certain prism traits became serious. Of course, traits can't be faked or simulated. The program knows better. And the rates of envy and animosity declined as the user base increased and the prism was better understood.
And how was this first received in your pilot community? Who were the test subjects?
I launched it in my school, my high school, which was a fairly diverse community aside from the age slant and large enough to get useful data. And I presented it for the first time at a school technology night. It was a basically mandatory event because everyone was getting some kind of extra credit for it. So I knew I could pull in enough new users for it to catch. And instead of pitching it like, hey, would you consider supporting me? Which I wasn't even supposed to be pitching anything. I just got up and walked everybody through the upload process so that they would do it right there. And they did it. No questions asked. I didn't have to sell them on it. I let it sell itself, and it was beautiful. Weird and slightly unsettling, but beautiful.
You must have been generally well liked or something, because I mean, if I had done the same thing in high school, I'm not sure I'd have gotten the same response.
It was a combination of the facts that people liked me okay, and I didn't talk much. I reserved my words for when they held most comedic power, but then went back to quiet and enigmatic. I acted a certain way to earn respect, and it paid off in the form of undivided attention when I got serious real quick.
So when it caught on in the school, are you monetizing it at this point?
No, I wasn't even thinking that way. I just wanted it to work and get a fair representation, and I knew it would need a ton of work to maintain, and that one way or another, if I could sustain that, I could focus on expanding it later. But I got an unexpected call after technology night. I don't even know who was in the crowd that picked up on it, but Inter wanted to talk to me.
Okay, wow. And they hired you.
Not yet. The first thing they did was give the new, actually unreleased lens to every student in my school. Nothing could have been better than that. For me, for the app, for the school, it was huge because now we're all running it on this brand new device. And I was meeting with Inter people almost every day to figure out how we could link visual data and other new data streams with the Prism. And when it worked, they launched it.
And they got creative control over the Prism at that point, I assume.
No, I retained control. That was the condition, that I'm the key holder.
Oh, okay. The Prism is your baby.
In the sense that I created it and want to be its primary caretaker.
So what was it about the Prism? I mean, why that? The color spectrum. Why was that your visual representation of the human data?
It was just my mental language. I mean, I hadn't always thought about psychological traits and social factors linguistically. I had thought about them abstractly, so it was more natural to create a visual than a written code. With the Prism, you're basically seeing it how I see it. So when people ask, does this color or wavelength mean this? There's not really a perfect answer. I mean, they're probably not even close conceptually, but they're never going to be exactly right anyway because it just doesn't translate like that. And who knows, maybe the same result could have been achieved with high contrast live stream brain scans, and we would interpret it just the same. Maybe it's all circumstantial. But right now, the color spectrum works for us. And a lot of the communication, the suggestions and all that don't rely on explicit dialogue, which actually expands the boundaries of what we can communicate.
So really, the idea of an OC like me joining at this point is completely theoretical. There's no way I would learn it now.
OC meaning off the chart, slang for a non-Prism user. No, you could. New users are eased in, and it would be clear to everyone how far along you were. In fact, it becomes easier to join as the system is further integrated into society. But again, that's up to you. I'm not trying to win anyone over.
So, but for you, what is the goal? You're not trying to grow your numbers, but at what point of Lens being integrated into modern life do you say, yeah, we've done it. This is how far it's supposed to go?
Well, modern life isn't a single thing. There are many cultures which haven't taken a thing from Lens and are perhaps the better for it, but there are people and regions that we'd all agree need to be reached by some form of progress. And if Lens is part of that progress, then the goal, not the goal, but the attitude, is to expand in new directions. I would think that's the natural response eventually, to think expansively. But I'm not driven by end goals. It's all continuation.
Okay, but do you think we need to keep forever tearing up the framework that we built on before the Prism era just to see like how far it can go?
No, I think we're nearing a leveling point within our culture where we stop thinking upward and turn it outward. But that's not going to come as a command, not from me at least. We have to determine for ourselves what challenges we still face in a world, a slice of the world, which functions so efficiently that we aren't concerned for our own survival, and decide how we'll relate to others within that, having already removed substantial barriers. Are we dogs chasing cars who don't know what to do with the highest level of achievement, or can we find for ourselves new opportunities wherever they might be? I think you're afraid it's removing our sense of self, and I think we're finally exposing it enough to know our real selves.
Well, I think it's exposing it too, even if I don't understand it, and I'm just not sure that it's a good thing in this context. I think people ought to be cautious, or should have been cautious, about machine technology becoming necessary for survival. There's so much more that can go wrong than right.
We were cautious. There was a threat to our survival.
I know you were cautious.
Everyone was cautious.
About what exactly, though?
Mostly ideas which had been popularized by science fiction. Large-scale computer brainwashing, splitting of people into factions, mark of the beast type stuff, which at least in some metaphorical capacity had been experienced, but only insofar as it could be implemented by a human on the other end. It was never the fault of the medium, the machine, but young people already had a trusting relationship with their devices, so it started with them. They were the first to prove that it worked. They became an almost self-sustaining economic society until other age groups joined in, and only then did it make sense to modify general infrastructure after it was collectively chosen.
But that's what I don't get. Since when could a corporation totally change our day-to-day systems of operation?
Well, for a long time, really, but Inter didn't corporately change everything. A lot happened very quickly, and the Prism adapted to every step of it. But for example, we didn't take drivers off the road. Inter didn't shut down businesses and create new ones, or send home workers and insist that they go virtual. It didn't pass any laws. Everything happened as part of a wave. If you take out our dent in the evolution of things, sure, it all plays out some very different way. But so with everything that has an impact.
So you think if it wasn't you, it would have been someone else?
Well, it would have been something else. There wouldn't be a Prism, but there could have been something equally pivotal to fill a need in society. And there's often a much broader it, some underlying trajectory that's bound to be restored.
Oh, you're a fate guy.
That's a bit of a leap, but I'll take it as a question. Not in a fanciful way, but that what's within our control, or appears to be, is always subject to larger forces, whether natural or supernatural. We can't control them, but they could still be in our better interest. And that's why I focus on the ideas in play, not just the perceived objects or carriers of the ideas. Ideas carry us, not the other way around.
So do you really even care about human channels, identities, people themselves?
A bigger and bolder leap. What if I didn't? What do you think my goal would be in creating this system as I did if it wasn't for the good of humanity?
Maybe the good of yourself? I'm not saying that is the case, but maybe.
I think the world belongs to the true perceivers, whoever they may be, and to create anything for purely self-interest is to forsake that quality. So I hope that what drives me is part of a universal drive, and if that's not the case, then I hope whatever compels me is satisfied.
I don't actually doubt your intentions. Seriously, I don't. But I question the goodness of your results.
Okay, well, let's break that down. What do you attribute solely to my work that might challenge what we call common interest?
Well, people who might otherwise be making something of themselves have too much free time on their hands, for one.
Do you understand how they're using that free time, as you call it? Do you realize how much the definition of free time, and of work for that matter, has changed and come to include new concepts we were formerly unable to entertain?
I understand enough that I figured you would say something like that.
Okay, so do you get that the free time you speak of is the result of improvements generated through more efficient networking and task sourcing?
I get that it could be.
Then you also can see how such improvements could result in higher satisfaction with life and increased energy for other things.
Then why aren't they doing other things? Everybody hires carriers to do their busy work. Machines do all the hard work. Nobody has to drive a car hardly anywhere.
Do you think people like boredom?
Well, I should be asking you that.
They don't, and they're not bored. Because even when we have a set task, we know ourselves well enough to be introspective and self-challenging because we've gained a deeper sense of self, of the value we each uniquely possess, and how it can be strengthened. And when we have a set task, we know how to really apply ourselves, our whole selves to it. I'm not saying you've never applied yourself, but I think there are certain abilities you'd be amazed you have, which a lot of us weren't allowed to exercise for a long time.
So your claim is that by working less, we can work better.
It's not just working less, and no, that's not a claim. We couldn't say as a marketing premise you'll be able to quit your job, because people had to find their way to that point themselves or it wouldn't arrive. They had to gain a new understanding of work and contribution before they could drop the old one. The notion of work, which you've cultivated over a lifetime, is based purely on hours and physical location, that you go to work and you stay there so long. But with the ability to participate virtually in almost any task, we don't even have to attach our identity to one so-called occupation. The social capital of today is authenticity and consistency. It's about doing the right work.
But what's wrong with choosing work for yourself, finding your passion?
Nothing, but the brain activity that generates desire doesn't necessarily correlate with ability, cognitive or otherwise, and is often misdirected. Desire is a good indicator of direction, but not destination, so instead we're looking at the question of what can be better.
What about just having a stable income?
We all have stable income.
Yeah, but knowing exactly what you're getting and where it's coming from, knowing where you stand, that is a pillar of society.
You know, it's funny, we were once considered the reward generation. It was said that we needed incentives and accolades to do anything, but we took an unprecedented leap in trying a new work structure that would actually give us some validation beyond merely proving ourselves to people who don't know us. And it paid off in the form of such increased productivity that we're able to distribute our resources within a voluntary system, support each other's growth, and hardly ever worry about what the next day will bring. We turned out to be the least reward-minded.
No, because you still have to prove yourself to people who don't know you.
We're all as known as we need to be, because we know ourselves and we're connected to people with whom we can really share something, and we don't have to see the same people every day to feel like our same selves.
Many people value the social bonds they experienced at work and their occupational identity.
There's abundant opportunity to bond over tasks, and it's no longer a daily survival mechanism. If you like to explain at dinner parties what you do for money, there are still fields where you can find that, whether by choice or necessity. There are still old-fashioned workforces, some of which we all rely on, others which provide busy work for those who enjoy it. We have a very manageable balance of users to non-users. The non-users fill gaps which we can't easily replicate, and the personal growth among users has ensured the availability of otherwise fleeting resources for non-users.
You're saying the OCs need the users to help them survive. That is so backwards.
Something had to inspire a trend of sustainable living, not in the symbolic way that was once flaunted by so many, but the realization that ownership isn't the highest form of experience. If we continued the trajectory of incessant competition for social status and material demonstrations, there wouldn't even have been enough homes or quality food sources or money itself to keep that game alive.
What does that mindset look like for you? What kind of home do you live in?
4-bed.
Surely you live alone.
No, I live with people. And don't call me alone.
You must have other homes too, though.
No, one at a time. For a lot of young people who didn't yet have an identity built on possessions, moving into a mod, starting a housing or meal plan, didn't carry a taboo. It didn't feel like a downgrade. We felt collectively independent, that we were part of something sustainable which would benefit everyone.
Let me tell you something. Anybody who wants to work hard and knows how to put away money can own something way better after 10, 15 years than any of these homes you're handing out.
First off, I'm not handing out homes. I'm not handing out anything. Secondly, better is relative. And if we'd stayed in that mindset...
Wait, what mindset?
You know, mine the earth for all the wealth society grants you, as though it'll never stop coming. and cling to those approval points so no one can surpass your own precious material wealth, because that's what keeps the system going and it's good for everyone. No, the career game could have only sustained a fraction, as it still does, and if that's all we had today, it's clear who would have been chosen. The ass kissers. And on the flip side, those who'd always been deemed the weaker would be jobless, or worse yet, sentenced to meaningless jobs. The working to non-working ratio would be greater than it is now.
Who are you saying we would have called weaker in this scheme?
Those who were systematically overlooked, who had intellect but not the same competitive drive. He looks at me like I should continue. I'll oblige. We used to speak of self-consciousness as a weakness. We'd write it off as anxiety or call it sensitivity in a demeaning way. But isn't that kind of the point? Feeling intensely and caring what others think, because if they don't matter, you don't either. It's other consciousness. It's the step toward oneness. Awareness of others is awareness of self. To really feel is to comprehend the spectrum of other feelings and value systems. To know the threat of honest self-expression as you wade through bullshit, chasing something that really resonates between you and another, to find that shared meaning. The conscientious aren't absorbed in themselves. They're absorbed by whatever's within their reach, but their reach was long obstructed by their own awareness of their ripple effect and their own sympathetic instincts. This shouldn't be a disadvantage, but we prefer the self-assured because we could be sure of how to approach them. I'm going to keep going. We've often thought of people as either predominantly reasoning or feeling, and overlooked those whose strength in reasoning masks their feeling as we expect it to be expressed, and perhaps simultaneously whose immensity of feeling quiets their articulate reasoning, thus forfeiting the value of those who can both empathize with a struggle and craft a solution. Truly, the most valuable manifestation of intelligence is the ability to see from the mind of another, but nonetheless, it was those with the quickest and loudest voices who reigned supreme, even and especially when this attribute was a side effect of single-mindedness and inability to understand the nuances of others. They were seen as the movers and shakers, but the hard truth is, anyone can move and shake. Only some can see the fragility of what's inside the box they're moving and shaking. We selected the sayers over the seers. To that I say, what a loss. And I hope everyone can see now. I once gave that speech in an imaginary film that I starred in. I won an Oscar.
After all you just told me, can you honestly say you designed the Prism without any biases?
I designed it to be true. Biases swing back and forth on a cultural pendulum.
But is it really anyone's place to interfere with who evolution favors?
There is no interference with evolution. Evolution it's everyone's place, whether they know what they stand for or not. It creates objects that live and die with the spread of ideas. We give voice to these ideas, these feelings. We're translating nature itself the best we can. Who's to say what's more or less natural? Only the extra natural, and we'll see about that. Or we won't. I do as my perspective dictates, and others may cast their vote. And it wasn't just me bringing down the establishment. I was part of an era that used its connectivity to hold each other accountable and demanded truth even before the Prism.
All right, okay, here's another argument. And I know you're not a man of science, but you want the truth. There was research before the Prism which tracked the direct correlation of intelligence quotient to success. So when you acknowledge the correspondence of certain traits with the industrial elites and present data on the traits of those who can't compete, well, you make a point, but you misattribute cause and effect.
The researchers you cite misattribute cause and effect by believing that the correspondence between IQ and whatever measure of success it entails proves the scope and objectivity of the test, if they believe such a thing, as you do. It's far from empirical, and certainly self-affirming to quantify such things.
But there's a consistent pattern of results. Speaking of which, I should mention, all intelligence boils down to pattern recognition. There is a concrete measure.
And there are countless patterns to be extracted from anything. Which patterns make it through to the conscious mind? This is what differentiates individuals. We measured intelligence by the ability to detect the patterns that we upheld as the trixiest. It's just stubbornness.
Then how do we measure?
Fuck measuring.
Then back to square one. Okay, so we play the game and let nature reward confidence as it does.
Fine, but confidence is ignorance, so it had to start losing eventually.
What the hell?
I don't mean this hyperbolically. Facts are always subject to something else. And if something else, then everything else. It's purely subjective.
But you're saying that confidence is ignorance confidently.
No, I'm not. I'm not claiming confidence. Neither should you.
There are times, though, at the very least, I know that I think, therefore I am, and if my thoughts are real, I should be expected to offer them as such in the real world.
Yes, you should, but the assembly of words you call your thoughts are no more you than anything else. You, being temporary, are passing through something else as thoughts of its own. You are metaphorical.
All right, we're not speaking the same language.
I'm speaking plainly of what we can know by induction from the unknown, however impractical the realization may be in the moment. The only figurative phrase being thoughts of something else in the context of the statement, but all being figurative in the big picture. Can we agree on that?
In the present, at least, I'm real. Can you agree to that?
As real as you need to be. To whatever extent the self is an illusion, it's a careful illusion. So if we trust the universe at all, should we try to solve the purpose of it, or accept that there's a reason it's not all stated more plainly? That's rhetorical, don't answer. Spoiler, it's A and B.
Well, I think we have to try to understand what we can while we can. Maybe the question I'm failing to ask is, regarding your bias, are you bothered by that disparity among types because you actually think that it stifles worthy contributors, or do you just really care that everyone is included?
It's one solution to two problems. Open up the pool of contributors, and the group tank effect elevates everyone's potential. It also exposes realities that are easily concealed under concentrated power. Figures who are not what they seem, even to themselves, motives which are fundamentally flawed or misrepresented, and the simple refusal to confront inconvenient truth. The best simply were not the best. But change can't be forced on the masses. They have to choose it for themselves. Right now their choice is to enable everyone, regardless of qualifications, to be the best they can be, which reinforces trust in each other.
Well, what if that hadn't been the case?
What, if truth was something else?
You know what I mean. I mean that even as it is, you can't deny there are undeserving beneficiaries.
Let me ask you this. If someone steals from you, is he deserving? Because that makes him the winner at the game he's playing, even if it's not your game.
Yeah, but that's an exception to the rule. Those who steal are marginal in the big picture.
Well, credit to those who didn't steal and could have, because they were not marginal and were left with no game to play. So I ask, what if there's an all-inclusive game where you only have to bring your best self to the table? Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Depends who sets the guidelines. But people like to try out new guidelines, and I set some that seem to be working on a massive scale.
Your system is helping people who don't even want to play the game. They just want to play you. Meanwhile, I've actually worked every damn day to get where I am, earning money, which is losing value, by the way, and earning respect without a prism, which is fucking hard.
You've worked for those things and played your game respectably.
And I don't really care what you think of it, because you caught a break when some trendy company bought your science fair personality test and sold it to people with their heads up their asses.
Maybe we've all got our heads up our asses.
And you could stop playing innocent like this is just a thing I did for fun. People make it what they will. You know exactly what it is. That's why you've cowered from the public eye, preserving the mystique, so you never have to explain yourself. Smart move right there, son.
Here we go. I think it hurts you to see other people find success in a different way than you did, because it means your struggle might be less understood. And if you, in return, would prefer not to understand them either, that's fine. But I think that when poverty and suffering was abundant all around us, it hurt everyone, even for those not consciously troubled by it. Even for you, it was demoralizing. And it forced us to retreat into the lies that we told ourselves about how it was necessary, and we were doing the best we could, and they just weren't playing the game right. We pretended not to care about others because it didn't fit with how we were investing our energies, until we couldn't even interact normally with our neighbors. We thought the lie was helping us, but it was hurting everyone. And it's tough because forming a helpful response to suffering can take a while, and it has to be a group effort, whereas compassion tends to be an acute feeling. It's okay, even necessary, to compartmentalize, but we can't detach. Do you remember when the Prism first took off? You would see homeless beggars wearing hand-drawn, cut-out prisms on their shirts or around their necks, with no idea how it worked, but knowing it meant something to the connected and educated. I couldn't forget that. It hurt. And I didn't know at the time whether the Prism would further divide or unite. But now, those sign holders have opportunities they never did, and people who care for them, whether they deserve it or not. So, victory for everyone who hung on. But we still have work to do. We have further to extend ourselves.
All right, well, I think we've both expressed our angles on this as well as we can, and I don't want the conversation to turn counterproductive, and I reciprocate the feeling that you've played well at your game.
Thank you.
So what else do you do with your life, Matt? Surely you've been successful in other things.
I'm good at some things, yeah, but I don't have many fun skills.
Well, what's a typical day in your life, if there is such a thing? What do you find yourself doing?
There are some routines and some variations. The main goal is always to hit one really good peak of inspiration, and if that happens, it's a good day.
Who inspires you, or what?
Inspirations come and go. Often it's just someone who's encapsulated an idea or been encapsulated by it so perfectly in a moment in passing that it serves as this enduring image.
So what is it then that you do for fun? Anything? Or do you just live in a state of digital euphoria?
You know, I can't really differentiate between fun and satisfaction. I find good feelings in smaller slices, sometimes in thrills, sometimes in a good calm. But actually, the biggest thrill, I think, is connecting with somebody off Prism when it just kind of works out. Not that that's a complete explanation, but you get the feeling of attachment that becomes somehow a form of strength. And then you keep at it until you realize that the bliss was contingent on ignorance.
Man, I can't keep you on a high note. We have to end well. Do you do anything just for you?
I doubt it.
Physical activities?
I do them, yeah. That's actually the best calm. I like sports. I've learned them all.
Competitively?
Yeah, but there's a tricky balance to be struck with competition. It can bring out your best, but the simulation aspect, the emotional investment, which of course you've determined to later detach from, refuses to be justified. You have to tell yourself the objective is to win in order to get the most out of your body, but the real objective is simply that, getting the most out of it. Losing is secretly okay, but admitting that destroys the integrity of the platform.
So don't admit it.
But then I violate the trust of my subconscious. When I finally concede that it didn't really matter, the goal wasn't what I said it was, and the end response is just to feel less. I don't like that.
You want to feel to the fullest.
Absolutely, even if it hurts. So I commit to feeling it long after, regardless of the results. Gives the subconscious time to analyze. No dulling mantras and consolations for me.
Did you grow up playing?
Yeah.
And did you enjoy it then?
Well, I enjoy it now. It's just, there's this lingering contradiction. I knew the feelings I invested were overshadowed by far more important things, that it was a substitute for feeling real stuff which I didn't have the means to control. At least that's how I perceived it. But I was compelled to put that emotional energy into this relatively insignificant game. And that wasn't an attitude I chose, it was just the thoughts I had. But I still played the games and trusted the answers to come later.
That doesn't sound fun.
Well, it worked out.
What did you play as a kid?
Soccer officially, but informally we went through seasons of things, just really structured neighborhood games, because I had siblings close in age.
How many?
An older brother, adopted 2 years before me.
You were adopted?
Yeah, and then our adopted parents had twin boys a year later, and a girl 3 years after that. But we made up a lot of our own games, which were insane. So all the kids on the block would come play with us.
Please, tell more. There's got to be some stories there.
Well, this one summer, when I was 9 years old, we played a game that I called Fury Road. 3 guys for each team would get on one bicycle. We were all young, so we could fit, plus me and the other small dude in the neighborhood. I was even smaller than the twins. We'd split up to share the load. So each team would start at one end of the street, about 75 yards apart. At the start, we'd all be screaming, banging metal, making a huge ruckus, and then we'd pedal madly straight towards each other. At least the one guy with his feet on the pedals would. So it looked like a joust. But then right in the center where we'd meet was a manhole, and each team had to do a 270-degree turn around it. So then they'd hop the curbs and book it in opposite directions along the grass to our team's circles. So by this point, we're as far apart as we can possibly see each other through binoculars. There's always at least one guy that had binoculars. He was the lookout. Once you got to your team's circle, which was spray painted about 20 feet diameter, exactly 20 feet, that I know, one of your players had to jump into the circle and start stacking all these bricks we had collected until it reached a certain height, which changed as we got better. And you could use a bonding agent even if you were resourceful and wanted to unstick it all later. Oh, and players had to be on the bike or in the circle at all times. So they're jumping on and off, keeping the bike going while they stack, and keeping an eye on the other guys. At one point, the rule committee decided everyone should be leashed to the bike, but they revoked the rule. It was me, actually. I was the rule committee. But the point was, you might stack as a team, or one stack while the others rush over to attack the other team with a barrage of projectiles. And our bikes would be decked out with attack weapons. So sometimes you needed a line of defense, too. You had to utilize your 3 guys strategically.
That sounds like a pretty dangerous game. I'm not going to lie.
It was, yes. And our mom banned Fury Road a few times. So I kept making little modifications. And when she confronted us, we could say, no, Mom, this isn't Fury Road. This is Fury Valley. We start much farther apart, much less chance of collision. Or this one involves trivia. It's educational. This is Learning Road. Anything to change it. Because I was running an organized tournament, and we were in the playoffs, nearing the championship of Fury Road. So the games went on, rules be damned. And I mention this because the blame is fully on me for everything that happened. I was the league commissioner. My mom had told me the game was banned, and I failed to pass along the message. So we were playing more or less in secret. And one day when we were playing at around dusk, my brother Jimmy got hit by a car.
Holy shit, was he okay?
No, he was pretty jacked up. He spent weeks in the hospital, months in rehab. He didn't fully heal from all of it. It was a major setback. And Jaren, his twin, didn't really know what to do with himself in the months without him, so I felt maximum horrible, yes.
I can't even imagine how you'd respond to something like that.
Well, I got pretty quiet and contemplative for a while. Actually, forever, I guess. But I still had to go back to school and treat life like it mattered. I remember that fall. This is kind of another story, but we were doing self-portraits for class, and I drew myself filled in with a color pattern, which to me was a serious representation of how I saw myself, because, I didn't really know if it would convey anything, but of course it was an early Prism. And when I showed it to the class, this one dumb kid in the front row started laughing. And of course that got a bunch of classmates laughing. And honestly, I didn't care what people thought of me or my work. What bothered me was that this ignorant little shit wouldn't consider the potential impact of laughing at someone, because I was certainly taught not to, as were my siblings, and it made me angry that my brother was still in the hospital and might not walk, while this kid got to be here acting a fool, and his fat face looked so damn stupid. I shoved the picture in his face like as if to chloroform him, and just slammed his head onto his desk.
Oh my god, did you get detention?
I went home, actually. They knew I was having a rough time. The kid was fine, I think.
Damn. Hell of a ride you've had.
Hell of a thing, this life. I'm sure you have some stories, too. Did you have siblings?
Yeah.
Let me guess.
Go ahead.
Older sister?
Yeah.
2 older sisters.
Yes.
And a younger brother.
You got it. Yeah, that's it. I was kind of in the middle, but I could talk about me anytime. Enough about that. We got to wrap up soon, so let me just ask you a few quick rapid fire questions.
And then I'm going to ask you one thing.
Okay, and then we'll call it.
But these better not be quirky questions like who would win in a fight between deaf oatmeal and drunk pasta.
Oh, scratch that one. Okay. Besides, we already know it's deaf oatmeal.
Oh my god.
All right, so here's what I got. Ah, no, that's a bad one.
No, say it.
Did you ever drive?
I briefly had a license and conveniently never had to use it.
Okay, moving on. Did you name the prism?
Yes. Inter wasn't obligated to keep the name, but they did.
Did you have any say in lens?
Well, they were considering a rename for the final version, so they did ask if I preferred lens or mask with a Q instead of a K, which have very different connotations when you're talking about a framework for viewing the world. I said either would be fine, but if it's mask, spell it normal, and I think I crushed the mask idea by saying that.
Here's a good one. Do you endorse virtual sex?
It doesn't need my endorsement, does it?
What about synthetic pregnancy?
Exercise judgment whenever bringing a human into the world.
Who's the first real person you usually see in a day?
There's not a usual, but I see a real person every day.
Do you have pets, real or virtual?
No,
I can't rationalize it.
don't need to. I could enjoy them. That's all the reason I think anyone needs. I just don't personally care to open a mental file for that, for domestication.
Not even fish?
No, the fish and master just hold each other captive.
You could have an automated tank.
Of course I could, but I think the whole point is to sustain them as you would a beloved plant, which you could argue deserves as much respect. Do they count as pets?
No, I don't think so. So no pets. What about, do you have any pet peeves?
The phrase pet peeve, and let that be the last it's said.
Okay. What if we end on that? What if that's literally the last word? Wait, no, I wanted to ask, do you think there will be a next big thing from you or anyone?
I don't know. I can't predict what people will do. Maybe the thing will be maybe that we don't need a thing necessarily. Maybe we'll enlarge our focus to see the big picture.
Okay, what did you want to ask me?
Will you put on my lens?
I've actually worn lens before. I'm not completely unfamiliar with it.
This is the master account, man. Just do it.
Is this like a symbolic thing? You want me to see through your eyes?
Our eyes might not be as different as you think.
Okay, sure. All right.
Put them on.
You're not even logged onto Prism. What am I supposed to see? Can I open the app on here? Wait, it's not even there.
Okay, I'll wait. But he won't get it for a while. Huh, that's odd. The field has been leveled.
Well, I'll let you figure that out.
And I'll let you do the same.
My God, there's a big crowd outside. I swear they weren't there a minute ago. They must have heard that we were wrapping up and came out to meet you.
They aren't there to meet me.
As soon as you get that fixed, you should let the cops on your eyes, just in case. You never know who's in that crowd. It's always a hodgepodge.
I'll be fine.
You sure?
No, but I'm fine.
Okay, all right. Any final remarks before I let you go?
Yes, here it is. This goes for everyone. Let's not forget how we've progressed. Let's learn from our mistakes and our successes, because we've gotten things wrong before, and we'll get things wrong again. But what's right for the moment isn't always right for the next. So be ready for what you might become, the place you might fill in the bigger picture. Serve a common good, even if you're not sure it exists, because nobody survives this game, but something in you might.
Might.
That's all you can ask for.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
Pleasant indeed. We stand. He stretches, waiting to see if I'm actually about to leave. I am. He closes the window, then says,
Thanks for doing this.
one more time. I salute and let myself out. I drop the carcass of my lens in a public trash funnel down the hall. Admittedly a poignant gesture, but I allow myself one every so often. Did I come across dickishly? I played my part sincerely. Call me what you will, you'll probably be way off. How rare is it to truly know someone, even the self? I know more of what I'm not than what I am, just like Dave. But I've figured out a lot of what this vessel can do. For now, I'm going to load myself onto the chute and ride it out of this madness. No live cargo, it says. I'm not really sure if that applies to me right now. But the machine is made to serve the man, right? I do what I have to do. It won't stop me.